Welcome to Sales is Not a Dirty Word, the show that proves if it's a fit, it's a fact. I'm your host, innovative sales coach Aleasha Bahr, the creator of the Black Sheep Sales Method. If you're a service provider selling your own service and ready to sell differently than the mainstream status quo and convert 8 out of 10 sales conversations without having to act like a douchebag, then this is for you. If you want to know more about the Black Sheep Sales Method, go to aleashabahr.com. This episode is with Tracy Pleschourt. Tracy is a certified professional and personal coach and a dynamic entrepreneur. Tracy is the visionary behind Self-Made You, a life coaching, school empowering individuals to become the solution to any challenge they encounter. In addition to her coaching endeavors, Tracy co-hosts the Tracy and Gracie Becoming podcast with her daughter, Gracie, offering life coaching insights from two distinct generational viewpoints, which is so fun. Tracy's personal journey is as inspiring as her professional accomplishments. She's conquered overeating and overdrinking while building a multi-six-figure business and guiding others to do the same. Her mission is to support ambitious, lifelong learners in finding solutions and embracing a better path to achieving the outcomes they aspire to and deserve. And she has some proprietary ways of doing it that I thought were so cool I wanted to bring to my listeners. So let's go. Welcome to the big show. Sales
Thank
is
you.
not a dirty
I'm
word.
really excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here. We're not talking about sales, but this could
Oh
definitely
gosh,
relate
yes.
to sales. Yeah, because there are so many strange patterns and
Mhm.
beliefs that are created when you're younger that affect how you talk about money, ask for money, provide service, value, all of those things. So, how did you get into life
Well,
coaching?
it was from the very obvious path of advertising. Yeah, I spent 20 years in the advertising career. I was the director of operations for probably the Midwest's largest agency. And through that experience, I learned how much I loved to inspire people, how much I really loved to curate environments that they could really like create their best life, their best career from. And it was during that time that I recognized I was really being called for something more, even though I arguably had the best gig in the Twin Cities. I kind of did that unthinkable and left and went and pursued a life coaching certification, which then led me to other life coaching certifications and ultimately creating Self Made You. And I definitely look back with a lot of wonder of, wow, did that take courage or did that take me being really naive and not knowing what I was in for? But it was probably a little bit of both. But I'm really happy where I've landed. And like you said in the intro, now my daughter has joined me in the business and we are co-owners of Self-Made You, and we are co-hosts of the Tracy and Gracie Becoming podcast. So super fun. I would have never dreamt that I'd be in business with my daughter, but here I am.
Well, I love that. I love that, your daughter gets to dream beyond what the normal dream is passed on to our kids. She can see worlds of possibility and different ways of doing things and a way to live a life that's living and not just working
Yeah.
for somebody else. And I resonate with your story so much. I can't tell you how many times I turned down good money to pursue something that was more fulfilling, and people act like money is supposed you make good money, what are you complaining about? And it's like, is that the
Right.
only metric? So it's definitely courageous to do
Yeah.
that and not play it safe. And that led you to creating the self method, which is proprietary, right? So how did you kind of
Yeah.
create this
So pretty
method?
much everything I've created, every program, every podcast episode, all of our frameworks has come from a need that I personally had. And I have just learned that and I think of myself a little bit as a slow learner, which I'm not being, self-deprecating. I'm just saying that because it works for me, I can safely assume it will work for most people. And so the framework, the self framework, really came from the awareness of how much unnecessary suffering was going on in my life through self sabotage. I recognized that the reason I was over drinking was because I was sabotaging like all of my endeavors. I didn't know how to handle stress. I didn't know how to allow boredom. And so I would turn to food and alcohol to kind of fill those gaps. And ultimately, it led to self sabotage. And so that's like one of many examples I could give you. I also saw how much I was sabotaging my professional career. I would sit and fixate on all of the things that I quote unquote had to do, the really long commutes and having to, manage super big budgets and having to deal with all of the direct reports. And i I really had a mindset that sabotaged all of the good things that I lost sight of. And so I see that now very clearly retrospectively, how that played out in my life in literally every single area of my life. And so I decided, okay, how do you teach people to think differently? Like, how do you teach people to think in a way where they're generating feelings that drive the behaviors that they ultimately want? Nobody is taught how to think. Everybody's taught what to think. And so that's where the self framework came from, is I really like struggled with, how do I teach this? And it really started with, okay, so what did I have to start with? I had to start with a decision. What is it that I want in my health and wellness? What is it that I want from my profession? And so the self framework is the acronym SELF, SELF. So you start with a decision. What is it that you want? Now, Aleasha, this is like obviously applicable in any area of your life. It has unlimited applications. So, what is it that you want from your health and wellness? What is it that you want from your marriage? What is it that you want from your finances? Asking yourself that question, and more importantly, answering that question, not just asking it, but answering it, is so critically important. And it's the very first step that most of us skip right over. We start down this path never really understanding or answering the question, what is it that we want? So that's the S. Start with a decision. What is it that you want?
Yeah, and there is so much about that that I think is difficult for a lot of people. Don't even know what they want, kind of because they've never been allowed
Right.
to dream. And when they have dreamt, it's like something that feels very far-fetched. So it's like, "Oh, I wanna be a famous actor." And it's like, "Well, what about in between?" Like, and not to say you should, like, compromise, but I wondered, is that part of the reason that stops people from deciding, is that they can't think beyond, like, maybe what they dreamt of when they were 5 of being
Yeah,
when
I
they
do
grew up or
get quite a
something?
few clients who will say, I'm so broken. I don't even know what I want anymore. Like, I hear that all the time. And yeah,
Oh, that is
and
so
I'll and
sad to hear.
that feeling of brokenness has come from that unnecessary suffering, that spiral that starts to happen. But knowing what you don't want will lead you to what it is that you do want. So those people who tell me I don't know what it is that I want, I can like hold their hand and walk them through kind of a discovery of, okay, that's okay, but I want to know, like, what is it that you don't want? And so tell me about the things that are going on in your life that you actually have some resistance towards, because ultimately that contrast plays such a profound role in your life. And most of us look at our problems, quote unquote, or our challenges as bad, right? They don't have to be bad. They actually serve a purpose, because that contrast provides you the context for what it is that you do want. And so we can kind of take that backdoor approach, and it's really really helpful for those people who can't answer that question, what is it that you want. Just look at what is it that you don't want. And that will start to kind of shine a light on what it is that you do want.
It reminds me of I think I talked to you about this when we met before this episode, the book
Yeah.
Unbound by Cassia Urbanek. She says that you can figure out women have a way of
Yeah.
complaining instead of asking, and so whatever you're complaining about is actually what you want. So, "Oh, it's cold in
Yeah.
here." You
Yeah.
want a
Yeah.
jacket, you know? So it sounds so similar
Yeah.
kind of to what you're saying, and e that feels empowering that, like, you don't have to just dig into your deep subconscious, like, whatever, that people feel this really tall order, and guess what? They do sometimes people not get it right what they want at first, and
And
that's
so that
okay.
decision that you're starting with, one of the most saboteuring type narratives that you hear and that you react to is once you decide, it's forevermore. It can't be changed. And that's untrue. Like if you're the one making the
Yeah.
decision, you're the one that can change it at any given moment. Like you can change it 10 minutes from now if that's what you want. But starting with a decision puts you in the driver's seat, puts you in a place of power. And then knowing that it doesn't have to be a decision that is long lasting. This can be a dynamic decision. It can be an ever changing decision. Like that's a decision in and of itself. And that too keeps you in the power place. So I think that, there are so many sneaky ways that our primitive brain likes to sabotage us. And that's one of them. But if I make a decision and it's the wrong decision, then what? The answer is then you change
Yeah,
it.
totally. Can you imagine the pressure to get
Yeah,
it perfect on your
right,
first
right.
try?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Okay,
Okay,
so
so
the
tell us about the
E
E.
is eliminating self sabotage. So I've already kind of
Okay.
touched on it a little bit, but we all operate by default from our primitive brain. And I want to say sometimes, but I'm going to say most of the time. Our primitive brain, it's also known as the amygdala, that is really like missioned with keeping us safe, keeping us alive. It's the survival part of our brain. So it has a purpose. I'm not here to villainize it. It keeps our heart beating without having to think about it. It keeps us breathing without having to think about it. But it also provides those very dramatic thoughts that, often are going to sabotage us if we react to dramatic thoughts when we're not in any danger. So, an example I always like to use is you're walking through the kitchen and you see the plate of cookies. You have this primitive brain thought, you better eat those before they're not there anymore, right? Or you better
Oh,
eat it now while the
okay.
getting's good, something to that effect. That's what my primitive brain says. And the truth of the matter, because that's very dramatic, the truth of the matter is cookies are widely available. I could get cookies at any time, anywhere, right? Like I might have to be a little inconvenienced. I might have to bake them or might have to run to the store. But the fact of the matter is, they're not going anywhere. They're not going to be unavailable to me. But yet my primitive brain is being super dramatic and saying, you better eat those. It's also making like, it's hinting at survival too. And obviously, I don't need to eat the cookie in order to survive, but because I want it, I think I have to have it. And that just sets you down this path of almost eating against your will. And then you start into the whole shame cycle. So, all I really want you to know or take away from the E is that your primitive brain is the part of your brain that keeps you alive, but it does it in a very dramatic way. It offers you a lot of fear based thoughts. And so, eliminating the self sabotage that can come from those fear based thoughts simply happens through the awareness. And so, you and I talked before we started the recording about the difference in saboteur narratives. And I've come up with like 10 very common saboteur narratives that I know I hear most often. A lot of people can resonate with the people pleaser, and other people
Mm,
resonate with the
mm.
victim, and some others resonate with the controller. But there is this dominant self sabotaging narrative that you most often hear that you are reacting to. You're not responding, you're reacting. It's knee jerk reactions that sabotage what it is that you want. And so having
Mhm.
an awareness of
Mhm.
that primary narrative can eliminate the self sabotage because, and I'm not saying it's going to eliminate the thought from being there, the awareness of it being there and you not reacting and instead responding with, is that really true? That's a great question to ask yourself. Is that really true? Whatever it is that you're thinking that you would normally react to, just pause and question it, and you'll eliminate the self sabotage. Make sense?
Yeah, it does, of course. It's just like, oh, once I've been down this road, I know that like fork to the left, it looks tempting, but I know that it leads me to a dead end,
Right.
so I'm not gonna go there. And now you have to be aware of it to
Yeah,
know to avoid it. So it totally makes sense. So it's really just like being vigilant after you've made the decision on what thoughts are coming up and then questioning the
exactly.
validity
That's
of the
exactly it.
thoughts.
Like this whole process is all about understanding yourself, becoming more familiar with yourself, eventually learning to trust yourself. So, starting with the decision, what is it that you want and why do you want it? You learn so much about yourself. When you start eliminating the self sabotage through recognizing those narratives that have been repeated for years and years and years that you've been reacting to, and instead you start questioning those, you learn a ton about yourself. Thirdly, you can leverage your strengths. And this requires you to operate from the other part of your brain. So I'm super visual. So I always like to offer people this visual of the 3 pound organ that exists between your ears called the brain. If you were to split it straight down the middle, the left side is the amygdala, it's the survival part of your brain. The right side is the
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex. I call it your prodigy brain because it is the more extraordinary part of your brain. It's the part of your brain that you can
Hmm.
respond. The amygdala has you, or the primitive brain has you reacting. Lots and lots of knee jerk reactions that
Mm.
don't end well. Whereas the prodigy brain, you can respond. And that typically has you in a pattern of getting you closer to what it is that you ultimately want. So you can tap into things like empathy and discovery and innovation. You can like navigate from your values and connect to higher sources like nature or God or your future self when you're operating from your prodigy brain. So, specifically, learning how to
Mm.
leverage empathy, learning how to leverage innovation, learning how to leverage curiosity is going to get you so much closer to what it is that you want. And when you start with a decision about what it is that you want and why, and you eliminate those that self sabotage by being aware of the narratives that you normally hear, that right there puts you operating from your prodigy brain because you are being intentional. Your primitive brain does not allow you to be intentional.
Mhm.
It's just by default. It's very subconscious. Where when
Mhm.
you're operating from your prodigy brain, by default, you are, if you are being intentional, you can tap into empathy, curiosity, innovation, creativity. Okay. Those are the strengths that you want to be leveraging. And those are the strengths that are really going to quiet down those primitive brain narratives, the fear based narratives that you're used to hearing. So, trying that, asking yourself, what's the most compassionate and loving thing I can tell myself right now? That creates empathy.
Mm.
When you answer that question, that creates
Mhm.
empathy. When you ask yourself the question, you know, what other factors might be involved that I'm not seeing or that I haven't seen before now? That creates discovery. You start to kind of explore, right? You can't go wrong when you tap into those strengths. So again, they're only available to you by your
Yeah.
prodigy brain. So you want to make sure that you've quieted down any of those fear-based narratives through the awareness. And then finally, that fourth step is finish with a decision. So the first and the fourth step are the exact same. It's just this time you're asking yourself a little bit of a different question. You're asking yourself, what is the next step I can take? that is so easy, it's hard not to do? What's the next step I can take
Hmm.
that is so easy, it's hard not to do? Now, notice most of us will say, how do I get to from 0 to 60, like right now? And that is so sabotaging. Like,
Mhm.
how about incremental, easy steps? When it feels easy, you find yourself in flow. And now you've got the compounded effects. And before you know it, you are so close to where it is that you want to be. You're so much further down the road than where you want to be. Because when you're operating from your primitive brain, you're just kind of in a spin. You're in a spin of fear. You feel stuck. Think about how many times you've expressed, I'm just stuck, right? That's because you're listening to those fear based narratives. So, these 4 steps, when you're taking these, like kind of, you're thinking about it as a cycle, you just never stop. This is not a finish line. This is more
Mm.
of life. I think about life as more like a carousel, like a merry-go-round, right? There's no finish line. And you
Mhm.
get to make it what it is. Like you get to discover all that there is to see. And if you think of a merry-go-round as something boring and there's nothing new to see, then that's what you're going to create for yourself. But when you think about it as a finish line, I promise you that finish line just keeps moving. This is not a race. This literally is an ever evolving cycle. So constantly retain that power and learn how to trust yourself by starting with a decision, eliminating the self sabotage, leveraging strengths like empathy and discovery, and finish with the decision. What's the next step I can take that's so easy? It's hard not to do. And you just keep doing that over and over and over.
Yeah, and I bet that you get better and better at realizing when you're being driven by fear. At first, I'm sure it's a little difficult. So, I this I know in a lot of other podcasts you do it live, and so I think that would be powerful for
Uh-huh.
people if we did this
Mm-hmm.
just to give them an example. So, like, I got a wild hair, super wild hair that we could just sell our house and our other rental property and have a good chunk of savings, and I could operate my business from anywhere, and we could travel and live in places for
Mm-hmm.
like 4 to 6 months
Mm-hmm. So
with our
those were a
kids.
lot of thoughts.
So, if
How
I
are those thoughts making you feel?
yeah. Well, I was gonna start with the decision. Should I start with the decision? No? The thoughts make me
Okay.
feel
Okay.
very excited.
That's amazing. So if there is any sort of like problem associated with this circumstance, I always want to kind of reveal that first. If there's any sort of unwanted feelings, because it's going to tell me which part of your brain you're operating from. Does that make sense? So you can still leverage yourself, the self framework, even when you're feeling the wanted feelings, even when you're thinking the thoughts that create joy and excitement. But it's always good to know, like, where are we starting from? Are we starting from a fear-based narrative, or are we starting from our prodigy brain and tapping into innovation, which it sounds like you are? So that's amazing. But let's go back to the story. Is there anything else you want to fill me in on?
I mean, the only negative feeling is that, my husband is very conservative and low risk taking. So, it's probably not going to be as exciting for him, you know? It's like a much scarier thing. But if it was, just me and my kids, the only people making the decision, or maybe, like, my husband wasn't like that, then it would be nothing but
Okay.
excitement. So I don't know if that changes anything because it's, like, an
Yeah.
external factor,
Well,
not really an internal
so
factor, but it kind of
so
is, I
have you
guess.
talked to him about it? Have you even like run this
I
past
did.
him yet?
It gave him I did, it kinda gave him a
Okay.
panic attack,
And why?
totally.
What did he tell you?
Well, he's coming
Mhm.
from his
Mhm.
primitive brain, for sure, and he's like, "We won't have a home, like, they'll be rootless, it'll create a bad habit where they don't stick with anything," stuff like that, where, obviously, I feel like our family is the constant, and the values and principles that we're instilling in them is the constant, and like curiosity and adventure and
Mhm.
exploration is the constant. And I could also, it would save us so much money too, because I'd just be renting, we wouldn't have daycare, and I could have like a child development graduate, come with us to do the educating. So like they would get the writing and reading, but also this other type of education that just opens worlds of possibilities in your mind, because you're just provided such a different foundation than growing up in an American school, which is very much about like lack and not enough and needing more and
Okay, so
like
have you
whatever.
already made the
So
decision? It sounds like you have a lot of
no.
evidence for why doing this is a good decision, but you haven't made the decision yet, right? Okay, so what
Right.
is it ultimately that you want? Do you want to do this only if your whole family is on board?
Yeah, I don't want to leave them.
Okay. Is that an option?
Yeah, I would feel
Yeah. Okay.
to leave them? No. No.
Okay.
Not for me anyway. So, like, it's kind of like I think the decision is start to figure out flexible ways that something like this could be possible and feel
Yeah.
comfortable
Okay.
to everybody involved.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Is that
So
a
I
real
wanna,
decision?
like, gather more
Okay.
information, like right, right, okay. Tell me
Basically.
why. I think you just sort of did because I wanna make sure, like, I'm covering all my bases. I wanna take everybody's feelings into account. What else? Why else do you wanna take time to gather information?
Yeah, so that it's comfortable for everyone, we can feel confident about it, and we can just be really prepared and excited for whatever is gonna happen in the future without, like, unexpected. Of course, there's
Mhm.
gonna be unexpected surprises and stuff,
Yeah.
but the more you know, the more prepared you are for
Okay, so
those
the decision
unexpected
is I want to
surprises.
take time, gather more information, really like use time to our advantage so that we are feeling more prepared. Any other reasons?
To convince my husband so that he feels comfortable.
Okay. Okay. So here, you've just beautifully teed up step 2. So what are the saboteur narratives that you're hearing? Like, and they're gonna be they're either
Uh,
gonna be
I'm
screaming at you and it's gonna be really obvious, or we're gonna have to dig a little bit. And so this might be a little bit deeper. There might be hesitations, or it might be like, oh my God, this is so frustrating because dot dot dot. So what do you think the saboteur narrative is that you're
I mean, the saboteur narrative is at least somewhat that's a scary decision. People are gonna judge you. They're gonna think you're crazy. Um, Being rootless isn't good for your kids. Like, I do get that, but I think that we'll eventually set down roots. It's just the activity of
okay?
exploring where and how. So I
Okay.
think that that's just fun to think that we can
What would you
try
say is the
different
most
hats on.
prominent narrative? Is it the fear, and it's definitely fear-based. Is it the fear of not doing it right? Is it the fear of what people are going to think about you? Is it the fear of kind of the hyper vigilant fears of all the things that could go wrong? Is it the fear of not being able to control all of the elements and the dynamics? What one would you say is most prominent?
I think the biggest fear is definitely like,
Okay.
my husband.
Okay. So would you say it's more of a
Yeah.
control thing? Like fear of not being able to control what he is thinking and feeling, which is very valid and very human of you.
Mm. I mean, yes, but more so like the fear that his need for control is going to affect
Mhm.
my life in a
Okay.
negative way. So his fears are, like, going to make it so that I can't pursue possibilities, and, like, what does that
Okay.
mean for
So
us?
this is what I mean when there's always, deeper rooted fears. It's very easy to kind of pop off and give the very surface fears, but when you start to explore this and really ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? And then you'll come up with an answer, but then you start going, okay, and so why is that a problem? Because why is it a problem if your husband is fearful about the future, right? You're fearful about the future and you still are kind of on this path of wanting to explore this. Why is it a problem that your husband's fearful? Like, he's a human being too. Of course, fear is going to show up. Why are we making that a problem? And there's really something underneath that. That's the saboteur narrative that's really got its like grips in you. And it's, is this going to cause a problem in our relationship, in our marriage?
Yeah. And my like direct like life direction would take a,
Okay.
hard left or something. I would really much rather him be a part of it. But the idea of like living this life in America that's like chained to, extracurricular activities and like missing your life because everybody's so stressed from work and, you get these pockets of joy occasionally is
Okay.
like very sad to
Yeah.
me. It's
Yeah.
more sad
And
to me.
so you kind of know what that narrative is, that if I can't control him and his thoughts and his feelings, the marriage might be in trouble. And it, and is that really true? Like,
Mhm.
is, if you can't control his thoughts and feelings, is the marriage really in trouble? Do you really feel like you have to be able to control his thoughts and feelings? Or do you even really believe that you can control his thoughts and feelings?
No, I'm not really into controlling. I want buy-in because it's much more
Mhm.
powerful when the person is bought in.
Mhm.
Like, not because I said so. Like, I don't want anybody doing something because I said so because
Yeah.
they're not gonna show up the
Yeah.
same.
And so you can
So,
want him to buy in, and he either will or won't, or
yeah.
will over time, right? And just recognizing the truth of it. I really want him to buy into this. I really want him to get as excited as I am, right? And just being really
Yeah.
honest with
Yeah.
yourself about that, it feels very different than if he doesn't feel the same way I do. Our marriage might be in trouble. See how
Okay,
that
you're right.
feels so
Yeah.
different? Like, you know,
Mhm.
I want him to buy into this. He may or may not get there. And that's okay. Like, you can want anything, and being honest about it versus trying to like white knuckle and be really grippy about it feels so different.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
every
it
time that
does. You're
saboteur
right.
narrative shows up, I have to control him, or, and I know that on the surface, you're not thinking of yourself as like the controller, but
Right.
deep down, it's like, if he doesn't comply, if he doesn't like read my manual and comply to what it says, then our marriage might be in trouble. That's your primitive brain. When ultimately you want him to be just as excited as you are. Okay. So,
Yes.
knowing that narrative, it's going to show up because nobody's going to take that primitive brain out of your head. But the difference is, instead of
Mhm.
reacting, so tell me what it would look like to react to that narrative. If he doesn't,
I would probably be really negative in my approach. Like, you're probably gonna say no, and you're so closed-minded and blah, 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 and that
exactly, it's
approach
going
is
to
not gonna get a
sabotage
good
everything you want,
response.
right? And
Mhm.
so, what would responding in a way that you have an awareness of that kind of controller narrative, now that you're aware of that,
Mhm.
you can leverage the awareness, puts you in a different part of your brain. It puts you in that prefrontal cortex where you can tap into empathy. You can,
Mhm.
I'm guessing that you can understand why he'd be nervous. Mhm. So
Of
tapping into
course.
empathy for
Yes.
him, tapping into empathy for
Mhm.
yourself. You're super excited about this, and you have a list of great reasons for wanting to make this decision. So, of course, you can have lots of empathy for yourself. You can have lots of empathy for the circumstance at hand, right? you can tap into discovery. Like, what are all the factors that might be involved that when I am super laser focused on what it is that I want, I'm not seeing what's in the peripheral? What are some factors that you
Mhm.
might be missing that when you ask yourself, when you kind of tap into discovery, what other factors might be involved with like him and his feelings and your hesitation around like having this conversation with him and giving more time to collect more data? What do you think are some of the other factors?
I mean, I was really thinking through, like, logistically, like, what about health insurance? Is the, child development, au pair, whatever, going to, like, live with us or have, like, a separate spot? Or, what about car seats? Like, I was definitely thinking of all those little things and how practical in real life it could be, and trying to
Mhm.
work through those things, and, like, visas and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
Is that what you mean?
this you've made the decision around wanting to give a little bit of time and space to collect more data. You've eliminated that sabotage, the potential of self-sabotage by being highly aware of that saboteur narrative that, is telling you you've got to control what your husband thinks and feels. Otherwise, our marriage is going to be in trouble. And now I want you to like really start to explore like why is it a problem for him to have his own thoughts and feelings about this, and why is it a problem like for potentially to allow him the time to kind of get excited. There may be other factors involved here, or if he never gets excited about it, there may be other factors involved. Like maybe, here's just an example.
Mm,
Maybe when he was growing up, his family was always on the move. So maybe he's had the experience, or he grew up with a friend whose family, member was in the service, and he saw firsthand what that experience. So maybe there's something
mhm,
in his past. Like so there's this discovery that really helps kind of create more empathy, more understanding
mm.
broadly about this circumstance. Anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about his history, but I think that, like, curiosity that I'm coming up with is like, how would this be comfortable for him? Like, what exactly
Mhm.
are your concerns? And are those concerns something that there are solutions for? Or is there like a middle ground? Or
Yeah.
those were kinds of thoughts I was having. And if the only option is to stay here, I think the other thing on the peripheral is obviously like, what happens
Mhm.
if the marriage doesn't work out?
Mhm.
What does that look like? And that kind of you have to think about
Yeah. And Aleasha, you're
what
doing a
if,
really good job of staying in that prodigy brain. You're already tapping into innovation, right? Like you're kind of thinking outside the box already, which is great. You just
Okay.
have to be aware of how the primitive brain will start to create those fear based narratives. And it's going to be creating those narratives in support of that initial belief. So you have to kind of be aware of its bias, but you're doing a great job of thinking outside the box. And that final step is what is the next step that you can take that's so easy? And I'm going to underline that. It's so easy, it's hard not to do.
So the next step would be giving my husband space to
Mhm.
think about it. And giving him like I would like to put like a timeline on the space, because there's a
Mhm.
habit of it becoming indefinite. But yeah, like putting just really like sitting back and saying, I've planted the seed. Now let's see what happens. And I mean, what you're saying, for listeners' benefit, I think it'll help to know, like, I have a default reaction because of my childhood of, my mother always trying to control me and make
Mhm.
me do what she wanted. So whenever I feel like someone is holding me back, my initial response is
Yeah.
like, I'm out. I'm gonna go do my own thing. You do your thing. I don't really care, but I'm gonna do my thing. And so goodbye. And like that also like reaction of just like being like, you're a weight that like brings me down and holds me back and da. And I think that those reactions,
Yeah.
those like fiery ones that are
Yeah.
very extreme are probably like this primitive
Exactly.
brain that you're
And
talking about.
having that awareness right there, that's such a good example. Having that awareness is what's going to eliminate the self sabotage, like creating exactly what you don't want. You've already decided what it is that you want. You want to give it a little bit of space so that you have time to collect more data. But when that narrative that you've heard, like, yeah. My mom tried to control me, and I hate being controlled, and I don't wanna have to, like, succumb to all the cultural norms and follow some script. That's not me, right? You can hear that, and it's fine to have those thoughts and to even recognize where they're coming from. Most of our primitive brain thoughts are steeped in our childhood, most of them, right? And so to have that awareness is huge because it's so much more unlikely for you to react in a way that sabotages what it is that you want just through the awareness. And you also were creating empathy for yourself. I see where this is coming from. You're learning so much about yourself. And so when you use this process just over and over and over, you start to create a sense of trust in yourself. I don't need somebody else to make decisions for me. I can trust myself to make decisions. So that was a great example. Any takeaways from that?
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah,
My takeaways? Is that what you said? Yeah. I mean, I think that it's definitely a takeaway for me to realize that when I feel that fiery reactive feeling, that it is a sabotage coming through. And I've noticed that before, but
right.
sometimes I just can't resist. So getting better and better at that. And then also, really coming to feeling a completeness of a decision made that isn't necessarily like, doesn't a
Yep.
traditional step forward. What someone would think was a traditional, like, this is one
Yep.
footstep closer. It's not always like that. Sometimes it's like a decision about a certain time period that you're going to allow something to go
Yeah.
on. And, those are just as
Right.
of
Yeah.
decisions.
Always putting a little bit of space is helpful. Anytime we can avoid those knee jerk reactions and have a little bit of breathing room, hugely helpful.
Well, that was so wonderful, Tracy. And I hope that everybody, could think of a situation for themselves and can walk themselves through that. And that's a good stopping point for us. And we've reached the end of yet another episode of Sales is Not a Dirty Word. Thanks again, Tracy, for making an appearance as our guest today. And can you tell everyone how they can find out more about
Yeah.
you and how they
So if they
can work
just go
with
to
you?
www.self-made, M-A-D-E, and then it's the letter U.com, they will find all the ways that they can work with us as well as all of the free resources. And we have free coaching Fridays. So if you want to bring your own circumstance, just like Aleasha did, and get coached on it or watch somebody else get coached every single Friday, we offer a open coach group coaching session to anybody who wants to join in. So you'll find out all the information about that as well.
Okay. I love that, Tracy. You guys go check that out if you're dealing with something or feeling stuck or just unsettled. And thank you so much for listening. And I will see you on the next episode.